Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, and in this video we are going to learn how to create a dependent drop down, or we can say cascading drop downs. Means one drop down is dependent on other drop down. In this case, the state drop down is dependent on country and city is dependent on state. Means first we have to select the country, then we will see the number of states of that country to be listed in the drop down, and we will select the state, then the city should be populated in the drop down. So this is just an example of country, state, city. You can consider any of the drop down. Means in this case we have a 3 drop down, you can have a 4 or 5 dependent on each other as per your business logic or conditions that you want to work on. So let me show you the demo first. So let me select the country. Let's say I selected India. So you can see this. After selecting the country drop down, means after selecting the first drop down, we are calling an API to get the states and passing the country ID. So whatever the country ID I will pass, I will get the states of that. So I will select any of the states now. So after selecting the state, you see another API call, means call getting the city, passing the state ID. And similarly now if I select the city, so we will not be calling any API. So this is the drop down, country, state, city drop down. So now here I have just printed out these values, in case you want to save in the database, so that you can see later. So for now I have just printed the IDs of whatever the values I have selected. So guys, it will take a lot of time to code all the things. So what I have done is I have already prepared the backend APIs for you, and Angular application is very small. Main thing is the backend. So backend I already created for you. I will explain both the applications, UI application as well as the backend endpoint APIs that I have created for you. So I will explain, don't worry about that, and I will leave the source code in the description so you can check it out. So let me show you the Angular application. So this is just an simple Angular application. I have not created any other component. I have used the default app component. So first thing you have to do here, I'm using Angular material here. You might have noticed in the browser. So in the Angular material, you know that there are mat input, mat progress bar. You might have noticed the progress bar when I select the drop down. So I'm using a select and I'm using the form field. So that's why these are the modules we have to import. So I have separately created a Angular material module here, and I added all the sub modules that I want to use in my application. Now in the routing file, you don't have to make any changes because we are not routing anything. And yes, now after that, we in the app module we have to do a few things. Whatever the Angular module we had created here, so you have to import it, and we are going to call HTTP services, means we are going to call API. So we have to import HTTP client module here, and we are going to use forms. So we have to use forms module here, and basically we are going to use the reactive forms. So we are using the reactive forms module here. These are the things that you have to do first. Now let's go to the code. So in the app component, let me show you the HTML first. So this was the mat progress bar that you have seen when I just call any of the API or select any of the drop downs. So this progress bar, so this is just code for that. It will show if this loading variable is true. So this will be true or false depending on the API calls. I will show you that. So this is just a logo, nothing fancy. Yeah, this is the form, Angular reactive form. So we just use the Angular form group, name it as a drop down form. And yes, this is the first field, means country drop down. So I name it as a country, and this I call the function, means when we select the country, we will call this function. This function will call API. I will show you later. And this is the country arrays, means at least first drop down should be have some value, right? So on page load we are calling an API that loads all the countries. So all the countries are in this variable, and I'm just looping this to make the first drop down filled with the values. Now we have this second field, the state field. So the same thing I have done here. On select of select, again I'm calling this function that will fetch all the cities depending upon the states, and this states array will be filled after we select the country. I will show you the logic. And this is the final drop down. City drop downs means after selecting the states, cities, this the cities array will be filled with the cities, and we are just looping all these. And this is the final thing that we are just printing here after selecting any of the country, like this. So let me show you the logic of this, or the main code. So see that loading variable is false initially, that is responsible for showing the progress bar. This is the form group that we created here. Let me show you along with this. There in this form group. So by default country, states and cities arrays are blank by default. Now on page load or on ng on it, we just initialize the form with these three form control: country, state, city. By default the values are null. And yes, on page load we are calling this get countries, means we have to populate the first drop down at least. So on page load we are calling this get countries. And yes, one more thing, let me explain you the service file. Actually we could have done all the things in a single file, in a single app component file, but it looks good when we just divide the code structure. So the service file is responsible for calling the HTTP services. So this is the country API, so I mean country function. So this is calling the get API to get all the countries. So all the countries we got here, and we just assign whatever the countries we are getting into this countries array that we have defined up at the top. And now this loading variable is false. Initially when this function is called, we are making loading variable true, so that progress bar appears. Now if any of the error will come, so it will console log here. So this is the on load functionality of this. Now our country drop down is populated. Let me refresh it. Country dropdown is populated, so I have to get the states after selecting the country. So what will happen when I will select the select country dropdown? And yeah, this is after I select the country dropdown, right? So if the first I check that if there is country is not selected, so we have to reset all the state and city drop down, and we will clear the state and city array, and we will return from here. Otherwise if country is selected, so we will just make this loading variable true, so that our progress bar will appear. We will get the country ID, and I'm just passing it so that it is not a string, right? And the same thing, we just defined one more function there in the service file to get the states of that, passing the country ID. So endpoint is get state country ID, we are passing from here, and it will return the number of states of that country, right? So the same thing we are doing here, we are assigning all the data to the states array, and we are making loading variable false, so that our progress bar will disappear. Now our state drop down is populated, let's say. Now what I have to do, I have to call a function to get load all the cities passing the state ID. So on the again let's go back to the HTML. Yes, in the state drop down we have this select function here, select state, and in this select state the same thing I am doing, passing the state ID. If state ID is not selected, so we will reset the city drop down and making the city array empty. Otherwise we are doing the same thing here, taking the ID, calling the get cities API, passing the state ID. So now all the city data is assigned to the city array, loading variable is false, and we are good, right? This is the Angular code. Yeah, that's it for the Angular code. And yes, one more thing here, in the environment.ts file we have defined the base URL of the API. This is my localhost URL, means whatever the endpoint will be, we will be using the like get country here, something like that. So that we are appending from the service file. If you notice into the service file, so what we are doing is we are taking this base URL from where, this environment file, and after the base URL we are just appending rest of the endpoint, that is the main part of the API. So similarly, first is get country, second is get state, then country ID, then get city, then state ID, and so on. So I will provide the source code for you. What you have to do, you will just clone the repository and you just have to hit npm install, right? So it will get installed to your local machine, and you just have to change the environment files, this backend endpoint code as per your machine. And yes, I will be explaining this as well, how this backend is designed. So yeah, that's it from this Angular application. Let's see the backend code for it. So how it is working, let me show you the backend code. So yeah, I have created another code, that is, we can say, REST API of the Angular dependent dropdown. So the first file is index.php file. So it is I will explain this later. So let me just first explain these are the SQL files. I will be giving you these as well, so you can just directly import all these to your database. So this is the database I have. I imported the countries table, similarly the states table, and similarly the cities table. This is the dump data I have. Now the next thing is database.php. so this is just a connection file and executing the query. These are the functions are here. So I have created a database class for here, and this is a constructor. On the constructor will automatically call. So I have just written all the code to connect that to the database. So these are just a constant taking from here. You can just directly mention your DB name here, and your username root, password blank, and your DB name. I mean, here we go the host name. So this is a connection file, that's basic file. And here I have created one more function to execute the query. So these are the helper function, right? So that we don't have to type in the whole code again and again. We will just be using these functions to execute the query. So it will accept a query, and this will run the query, and it will return the query result. Otherwise it will throw an exception. Now let me show you this dropdown.php. so this is a simple file, simple class file. Here we have imported the database.php, means connection file, and here we have three functions. The code is pretty straightforward, so you can understand. The first function is for the getting all the countries. Select a strip from the countries. So this is a first API you can consider. Second thing, we have to get all the states depending upon the country. So we have created another function, get state, taking the country ID. And similarly, this is a select a strip from here, from states where country ID is this. So this is the query. And the next is get city, taking the state ID. Now one more thing, we have this helper function. This is for the validating the endpoint, and this is to return the final JSON response, right? We get all the data in a JSON format. If you see in the call, if I call any of the API, so this is all JSON, right? If you see in the headers, so you will see content type application JSON. So Angular application consumes a JSON response, so we are just returning the final JSON response. appending this in these are the extra header parameter if we want to pass. Otherwise this is just to append the content type application JSON, and from here we are just encoding all the things to JSON encode. Means we are encoding all the things into JSON, and we are echoing or printing all the data, and we are hitting the exit. Means this is the final. Now the main thing starts from the index.php file. This is the root file, or you can say the default file it will be called. So these are the two files we need. So we just imported all these things I already shown you. And yes, these are required in your local. It will throw a CORS error, CORS error. So if you are this CORS error comes when your Angular application domain and your API domain is different. So right now in local it is different, right? So Angular application runs on this one, and this is the let me show you this. So this is the API host. So API hosts something different, and Angular applications is different. So it will throw a CORS error. So that's why we have added this one. If you are deploying your application to the same domain, so you can remove this part. Now, so after this we are just checking first thing that whether the whatever the API user is calling is correct or not. So let me show you in the browser. So if user is just directly hitting this one, so it means this is not a valid endpoint, so it should throw an error, right? So let's go back to the code. So first thing is doing, if there is no endpoint or endpoint is wrong, means first thing it is checking we have no endpoint, or if we have an endpoint but that is not belongs to that this one, that does not belongs to this, so we will throw the error as well. And we will throw this is the JSON response function that I shown you in the helper file. So this is the response we are just outputting into the JSON, and this is the status code. If you run this into the Postman, you should see 404. This is the 404 not found status. Now if all good, all those endpoints are belonging to the those three endpoints that we have defined in helper file. So now we will proceed. So this is a drop down class we had. So we have just created an object for that so that we can access the functions of that. So now let's say endpoints. Now we can check one by one if the endpoint is get country, means the first one, where it is, yeah, get country. So what we have to do, we have to fetch all the countries. So queries we already have written there, so we are calling the function. Otherwise we have to write this query here. That this is the benefit of dividing the code into the multiple files. So we have to call only one line to get all the countries. Now we have to prepare some response for that. So in the table, let me show you. In the table we have a country ID, code, name and phone code. So for now we need only ID and name. So what we are doing, we are, after getting all the countries from that is a raw data, so we have to just loop through. So we are just looping all the data and preparing the response that we need, ID and name. So our response is prepared and is in this countries array. So now we are just again calling the send response function and passing all the data that we need, and we are returning the status code 200, means success. So let me call endpoint. So we see we are getting the error. We should get, actually, if something is wrong, get yeah. So let's see, we can see all the countries, right? These are the countries, and the status is 200, means successful response. So this is for the get country. Now I have just in the comment what you have to do to call the endpoint. So I explained most of the thing in the comment itself, and the code is pretty straightforward, so you can understand. Now next thing is for the get state. So for the get state, you have to call the endpoint like this, passing the country ID, and here we just added a if condition whether user passing the country ID. So let's see, get state. See, if user is not passing the country ID, so we are just throwing error so that user knows. So country ID, let's say for India 101. Yes, so there might be some spelling mistakes. So yes, now endpoint is get state and country ID is 101. If user miss passing the country ID, so it should throw an error, right? So this is the, we are getting all the states for the country of this country. This country is 101 is India, so we are getting all the Indian states here. Now let's go, the same thing we have done here. We are just validating whether the country ID is available or not. If not, we can just throw error message. And other than this, we are doing the same thing here that we have done at the top for country. So this is pretty straightforward. Now let's see the city. So how we can call the city? So we can use this syntax here, index.php get city and state ID. So let's take any of the states. Let's say state ID is 10. So yes, we are getting all the cities of that states, right? You can use anything, right? I think, let me just, for 15 something like that, you can just play with it. So yes, this is the backend of it. I hope you understand this. So let's just recap this one. So in Angular application, we had created a form and a reactive form basically, and we had 3 drop downs, and we are just loading the country at the page load. And after, we have a select function there. After selecting the country, we are taking the country ID and we are calling another function. We are just calling the API to load all the states. Then after state is loaded and populated into the drop down, we are just calling again a function after the select of state. So we are taking the state ID and again calling an API to load all the cities, passing the state ID, and the city ID is our final one. So we are not calling anything else now. And I just shown you the backend of this API. So first we are just validating whether the endpoint is correct or not, otherwise we are throwing the error. And after that, we are calling the endpoint one by one, if else, if else, if. So guys, one more thing, that this data might be wrong. So this is just an example, right? You can correct the data if you think like this data is incorrect, this city belongs to this state. So you can just simply just change the IDs in the database and you're good to go. This video would have long if I would have coded along with you. So this contains 2 parts, front end as well as back end. If you want to see the live coding of this, so please hit a like button and add comment as possible, so that I will get to know that you need this one. So I will create a live tutorial of this, means coding step by step. So yeah, that's it from this video, and thanks for watching. And guys, this is a humble request, please subscribe, and it motivates me to create such videos. Yeah, thanks, bye, see you in the next video.